Hello class 7 students. Today we are going to revise the poem The Tide Rises, The Tide Falls. We have already revised it in the online class. Once again it will be another revision for you. Now The Tide Rises, Tide Falls is a poem by H.W. Longfellow, and as the title suggests, the tide rises, the tide falls. That is, it is talking about the natural phenomena or the very common thing that happens, that is high tide and low tide in the sea. So but what does the poet actually try to say through this poem? As you have already know that he is saying that time and tide waits for none. And another thing is that we find that through the three stanzas he is trying to focus on different parts of the day, and ultimately what he is trying to point out is that the permanence of nature and the temporariness of the human life. So let us first read the poem The Tide Rises, The Tide Falls by H.W. Longfellow. The tide rises, the tide falls. The twilight darkens and the curlew calls. Along the sea sands, damp and brown, the traveller hastens towards the town, and the tide rises, the tide falls. Darkness settles on the roofs and walls, but the sea in the darkness calls. The little waves with their soft white hands efface the footprints in the sands, and the tide rises and the tide falls. The morning breaks, the steeds in the stalls stamp and neigh as a hostler calls. The day returns, but nevermore returns the traveller to the shore. The tide rises, the tide falls. So, in every stanza, this very line, the tide rises, the tide falls, goes on like a refrain. Refrain means the chorus, like a chorus. That is the same thing is being repeated. Why? Because he wants to emphasize on the fact that the natural fact of nature, of the rising and the falling tide, it goes on happening in its own way every day, no matter what happens to the living world. Now, as I said, that each stanza focuses on different parts of the day, and the poem begins with the twilight, that is the evening time. And what does it say? The tide rises, the tide falls. That is the simple rise and fall of tides in the sea, and due to the gravitational pull. The twilight darkens. Twilight means the during the evening time, when the sun has set below the horizon, but the light of the day is still there. So that's called the twilight, and the twilight is darkening. That is, the twilight is gradually fading into the night. And what else do we find? That the curlew calls. The curlew is a large wading bird. So which is a common bird that is seen near the sea. So it calls. That is, we know that when birds go back to their nests, they call out very loudly. If you have been outside during this particular time when the twilight is darkening, this is a very common scene. If you look up in the sky, that all the birds are flying away back to their nests. So the curlew is also flying back to its home. Along the sea sand, damp and brown. Sea sands means he refers to them as means the sea sands refers to the beach. So the beach sand is damp. Why? Because it's being continuously washed with the water. And it's brown. Brown is the color which it gets because of the different things that gets mixed up with it as it's brought down. The traveler hastens. So there is a traveler, and what does he hastens towards the town? Hastens suggests the movement of the traveler, that is the traveler is in a hurry to reach the town. But what does he say? The tide rises, the tide falls. So here in the living world, of course nature is also living, but means in the human and the animal world, each of them are going back to their destination, and they are hurrying to reach their destination. But the natural processes that goes on, they go on in their own way. Darkness settles on the roofs and walls. Darkness settles, then that means that in the second stanza it's night, it's total darkness. But the sea in the darkness calls. So if you have ever been to a seaside, and if you have noticed that when it becomes very dark, the call of the sea, it becomes louder in that way. So that is the darkness, that's the sound of the waves. Okay, the sea in the darkness calls, the little waves with their soft white hands. So the waves have been personified. Personification means to give human characteristics to something that is means to a non-living thing, inanimate object, in that way. So the waves have been personified here as having soft white hands, which efface means erase the footprints on the sand. Yes, the traveler has walked on the beach, and there as he walked there on the wet sand, there were footprints were formed, but as soon as the waves came, they just washed away, and the footprints also washed away along with it. And the soft white hands, here white refers to the froth or the foam of the waves. Again he says, the tide rises, the tide falls. So he is going on reiterating the same thing as to emphasize the fact that nature goes on in its own way, no matter what happens in the human and the animal world. The morning breaks, the steeds in the stalls stamp and neigh. Stamp and neigh means, steeds means horses. So horses, what are they doing? They are stamping their feet, and they are neighing, that is calling out, as the hostler calls. So it is, we don't find hostler, we don't find horses in this way now. It is like quite means olden times. These means when people used to ride on horseback, when it was kind of a means of communication. Then when they would go travel places, they would say stop by a roadside inn, and then they would keep their horses under the care of a hostler. So and the hostler is calling out the customers who have come, and handing them the horses. So they are stamping and neighing. The day returns, so from evening to night, and now it's day, but never more returns the traveler to the shore. But the traveler does not return. So it could be that the traveler has reached the destination, it could be the traveler is dead. The tide rises, the tide falls. So this rising and falling of tides, okay, this is also symbolic of our ups and downs in life, and also this joy and sorrow, life and death, they are all part of life. So through this poem, what the poet is trying to say is death, unhappiness, sorrow, they are all part of life. And one thing is that nature is permanent, but our life is very short. Okay, so there is a contrast between nature and the life of human beings or animals in this way. Okay, and another thing, another message, or he's trying to say is that the time, as I have said earlier, the time and tide waits for none. So we have done it several times. Hope you have understood it. Thank you.